Morphorminergonik. Revolutionary discoveries beyond space and time. Death and life on the path to truth in the invisible. These are the subjects studied by the scientist and morphorminergonik expert Lothar Erich Gluderer. The secret behind the algorithm of life and simultaneity. Discover the non-material matrix, a world beyond matter, energy and thought. We had the rare opportunity to gain an exclusive insight into Lothar's world. Already in his childhood, he experienced other worlds. During his studies in medicine and psychology, he went to the United States, where he continued his studies at an elite university. However, a tragic traffic accident brought him to the brink of death. How he returned, how he healed himself without medication, and what happened afterwards, he recounts in a captivating story that intertwines life and death. He is considered a pioneer worldwide in the development and invention of highly effective healing methods. He imparts his knowledge to doctors and other professionals who successfully apply his new methods, technologies, and this knowledge. Alongside the doctors, the down-to-earth South Tyrolean also assists numerous people from all over the world who seek his help. The Morphorminergonik is a welcome speaker at international conferences, whether in Moscow, Rio de Janeiro, or elsewhere. Having died multiple times and consciously returned, Lothar, a person between two worlds.
When as baby I was being diapered by my mother and she took me into the next room, I already had such a bad feeling because I felt there was someone, and I was supposed to sleep there. In any case, when I was then in the room, in this romper suit and in this crib, I saw entities to my right, I'd say beings that manifested down to their chests, and they scared me because I didn't know who they were and so on. And then I screamed because I was simply afraid. Then my mother came and said, "Everything is fine, don't worry," and so on. And I thought, why doesn't she see the people? How am I supposed to sleep here if the people are standing there? Then she went out again, and I just started screaming again. And then when she came back in, I used my abilities for the first time correctly by perceiving my mother precisely, and then seeing how far her perception range extended and that these beings were outside of her range. And then I was really scared because I thought, now I'm alone with this being. And then I quickly felt towards my father. And then I saw that he could indeed perceive them, but he rejected it. He was a doctor, a very well-known doctor. And in that moment, it was clear to me, you are alone. And then I saw my own life, the whole life already. I saw that very, very difficult tasks are coming my way, and they were such that I thought, I cannot accomplish them. I won't manage that in this life. But nonetheless, I couldn't do anything except come to terms with these beings now. And that's how it actually started. And when I got older, and with my father, we are in a beautiful valley in South Tyrol, in the Ulten Valley, which is very rustic. There were hardly any roads leading up to the farms, practically none. And these are all old paths that you take to go up there. And when I went up there with my father, I could feel what had happened there in the past. And those centuries-old farms, you can see the suffering there. someone hanged themselves, someone is somehow murdered or so. So that was very, very terrible for me. And I couldn't talk to anyone because nobody would understand. And of course, it was a very religious valley. So to them, none of that existed. It's all considered devil stuff and such. But I had to live there. There was no other option. And so when I sat inside the rooms, while my father was examining the people in the room, many didn't have electricity. There was no electric light on many farms. Then there are these candles or these oil lamps. And then you sit there, and in the so-called Lord's Corner, there hang then pictures of people from the First World War or Second World War. I noticed that they were really there. I sit there as a child, alone in this room. The clock tick-tock, tick-tock. And what do I do with them here? They stand and look at me. And that was very, very terrible for me. And so I had to learn how to deal with it all. Because the valley is how it is. That doesn't change. So I have to see how I handle everything. And once I remember, as a child, I was already older, about 6 or 7 years old. I'm standing in the kitchen, and then my father and my mother somehow have an argument, and I look at the fields and they follow natural rules. And then I see that they are actually talking past each other. They both mean well, but they don't connect. And that made me sad, because I thought people actually want to do good, but can't manage it. And for me, that was the decisive point where I decided for myself, I want to research all these things. I want to understand how these fields, how these rules work. Why do people suffer? Why can't it be different? Why are people sick? That's what I say too. When I was with my father, sick people, they have a completely different structure. And so I could also see what, for me, what was also terrible. I would say, for example, that someone will die, there's no chance anymore, he will die. And so it happened. But as a child, not being able to talk to anyone is very, very difficult.
Lothar works and worked with the world's leaders, whether at the World Medical Congress in Moscow or with leading state premiers. The South Tyrolean is a popular and effective seminar leader.
And so it happened with my grandpa too, where I also felt he doesn't want to anymore, even if his operation went well, but I then helped him so that he could die. And to the doctor's complete surprise, he was suddenly dead. And that, of course, gave me huge feelings of guilt. I did it because I thought the parents would cry, and I did something. I wanted to help Grandpa, but now I am somehow guilty. And of course, I couldn't tell anyone about it.
Clearing throat repeatedly.
Yes. And that's how the whole childhood went by. Trying to be as normal as possible so as not to stand out. But on the other hand, I had my own world where I even if my father was the district doctor, when I went with him, people used to have the deceased in the living room. But then you stood there and prayed and so on. Again, often no electricity, only candlelight.
Electronic.
But I never had any connection because I just see there is nobody there anymore. That is a body, it is nobody. And maybe the person for whom the others are standing there and mourning is somewhere else entirely.
but still you must look there because everyone says you have to look. And that's already difficult, to act as if you don't perceive anything and just do what everyone does, looking at that body where there's nothing. But where the person really is, no one looks. Yes, and so it was quite difficult. And that's why I also usually made sure I don't go out much, that I stay in my environment, which I recognize and where I can deal with the beings I already know, and that I avoid other beings elsewhere. Yes, and so I grew up. And because I had this promise to myself, I would explore everything, how to make people feel good, how they should understand how to interact with each other, and so on. That is why, for me, it was completely clear that I would study medicine. But studying, I actually realized that that is not really what it is about. Because here you just come and say, there's a muscle and there's something like an electric cable that's called a nerve, and there's a pipeline which is called an artery. Then I said, well, that's not what I want. I want people to be well, but in their vibration, in their being. And I saw that their structure causes diseases, but the disease in the body is not the root cause, it is at the very end of a long chain. And then I said, I will also do psychology. With medicine and psychology, I thought I would get deeper into these people, but then I saw, no, that's not it either. That's purely a humanities approach. You assume things, but it doesn't deal with real life, with what works. And in this sense, I then went over to the USA, wanted to study at an elite university there, was also accepted. And then I had a very serious car accident. I was sitting in the back, and an approximately 80-year-old woman who was confused and driving the wrong way, we would say a ghost driver, crashed directly into our car, and then I was very, very badly injured. I don't remember much about it myself, but the fire department got me out of the car, and that's how I ended up in the hospital. But since we had been swimming before, I was only wearing shorts and my wallet was in the car. And in the USA, it is like this: whoever doesn't have money or insurance, they don't even bother to look at them. But the car was taken away by the police, well, because they need to find out exactly what happened, as several cars were involved in this accident. And so I had nothing, and I wake up in agonizing pain, and the first image I see are beige curtains that are around me, and I was in such pain because I had head injuries, neck injuries, back injuries, abdominal injuries, and so forth. Then I could only look down with my eyes, and then I saw that I was naked, and there was a band on my right toe with a number on it, just like the corpses in our dissection course. So they had already pushed me into this side room with a number on me until I'm just dead, so they can send me as a corpse somewhere. Yes, and that was really, really difficult for me at first, because you have incredible pain. No person can imagine how bad pain can be, and then you don't really know anymore. Am I dead now? Because I'm lying here with the number on my toe, or am I alive, or somewhere in between? And then I had to figure out how I came here from the US with the greatest detours and difficulties and torments. And since my father was a well-known doctor,
I then went to specialized clinics in Germany, Austria, Italy, but everywhere it turned out they couldn't do anything more. I had to die, but I didn't want to die and said, there must be something. That then went on until one night I was admitted to the clinic with the emergency doctor and ended up right away in the ward where all the dying are. And then in the evening, the professor came to the bed and said to me, Mr. Gluder, we know what you have. And then I thought, yeah, great. He said there are two options, and I say, yes, two is always good, you can choose. And then he says, the first is you continue taking all the medications, because I was taking bucket loads of medications just to be able to live, and you will definitely die. Then I thought to myself, well, that's not an option. And then he said a bit later, the second is, we stop all medications and you will most likely die. And then he said, you must decide immediately while you are still conscious. And then I thought to myself, what should I do? I mean, that's not good, and also that's not good. And then he wanted to help me further and said, you are in medicine yourself. You know, if we stop all medications, you'll go through hell. And if you continue taking the medication, then we can support you with medication so that you do not have to suffer in pain and can die peacefully. But then I once again relied on my skills and took a closer look at this regularity and saw that if I choose the second option, I have a minimal chance to survive. And then I chose the second, namely hell. The doctor immediately handed me the sheet and said I should sign immediately. And then all treatments were stopped. Then there was nothing at all. And when one has taken so many medications for years just to be able to live, and then suddenly receives nothing, this is terrible. No one can imagine that, but that's how it was. And then the whole dying process started, and I discovered so much. I saw how we even create the outside. We create the outside ourselves, and how much strength that takes. So I had to give up the outside because I no longer had the strength to breathe. And when I no longer created the outside, then there was nothing except Myslev. Then I had the strength to breathe again. But at some point, I no longer had the strength to breathe, and I had to give up something more. And then I gave up the future. We also create that ourselves. I saw exactly how that happens. And so it went on and on and on. I had to keep giving up, until in the end, I only focused on one heartbeat and one breath. That is what I also teach people who have to overcome great challenges. One heartbeat, one breath. And one heartbeat and one breath. But then the strength was not enough again. And then I knew, if I give up the here or the heartbeat, I am dead. If I give up breathing, I am also dead. But I didn't want to die. So in this great distress, I once again used all my strength with all my discipline to breathe one more time. And when you have such an oxygen deficiency, everything hurts terribly when you are in this hypoxic state. But when you inhale, it gets a little better. And then I hoped, may this one breath last forever. Of course, I knew that wouldn't work. And then I had to exhale again, and then it was over. Then I had no strength left to breathe. And in this despair, I wouldn't even say despair, more an emergency.
Suddenly, because I thought, what should I do? What should I do? My inner voice suddenly said loudly, and of course I will never forget this, Lothar, you must think further than you have been taught and have learned. And at that moment, I saw clearly how our daily consciousness limits us. And in that moment, I saw my whole life in complete simultaneity, which quantum physicists talk about today, talk about theoretically. I lived that practically decades ago. And then I saw here how certain structures, as they impact me in this accident event, and I saw that today this inevitably leads to my death. These are laws of physics. But what I realized at the same time is that these structures, despite my knowledge, everything I had already researched, I can change them. I can change them today, even though the accident linearly was several years ago. And then I changed it. And just by changing it, I suddenly had the strength to breathe here. And then I kept working on it in a back and forth manner until I signed myself out of the terminal ward on my own responsibility. And from then on, I applied it to myself. And later, when I returned to the university hospital for a follow-up visit, the professor who treated me was also there, and his senior physicians, assistant doctors, nurses, and the whole team. And there he put up the images, X-rays, and also others from all the examinations that were conducted. And then he said, if we had not created this image ourselves and this image today, and if I hadn't examined you myself back then, and today he said, then I would straight up claim that these are fakes. But he said, since we did all of this ourselves, the chief doctors all nodded their heads in agreement. Then he said, then I have to call it a medical miracle. He says, we can't explain it. I then took this opportunity, stood up, said, knock on wood 3 times, and said, that can be explained, but goodbye forever, and left. Later, when I was then again at the university, I met him in the corridor, and he approached me and said, Mr. Gluder, we have your case we discussed your case multiple times in the professor's panel. We do not understand how this is possible, and we would like to admit you to the clinic, of course at the clinic's expense, and examine you from head to toe, he said, because we want to understand what is happening here. And then I said, no, you will not admit me anymore. And then he said, I understand. So I have the new thing that I discovered. These are things that exist. These are natural laws, but humanity has no idea about them. I say, still no idea. Let's hope that someday they will. And everything happens simultaneously. The entire life happens simultaneously, and you can change everything from any point, which is what I've been doing for decades when I help people. I can change everything from any point, but these are laws that humanity does not know, or does not know yet. And that is a shame. The whole thing then motivated me, because a professor asked me during the examination, Mr. Gluderer, how many people can you help per day? Well, I had never really thought about it. Then I just felt into it and said, 6, 8. Then he took out the calculator, worked it out, and said, then you can only help so many thousands of people in your life. So I said, yes, okay. And then he said, that's such a shame.
He said, can't you standardize that, develop technologies so that even people like me, he said, who don't have the skills can also do this, conduct applications, and thus millions of people could benefit. And this professor was then the impulse which inspired me to start conducting intensive research, to develop technologies, to develop devices that then completely healed myself. So what is unexplainable, that shifted bones became straight, that nerves grew back, because I was, among other things, practically paraplegic, completely paralyzed. And I roamed the mountains like a mountain goat. So this is all incomprehensible to people. And I then presented it then to the public at the World Congress in Moscow. And there was a very big response. And these experts then also said, this is the future of medicine. This must be the future treating people. Yes, and that is now what plays a big role in my life, namely that I am working with what I promised myself as a child when my parents had an argument, that I look at what is going on with people, I can recognize that, and you can measure it. And how we use these laws, which are actually all there, only humanity does not know them. How we apply such laws so that these people fare well. And since the body is the last instance where something manifests, we must start in entirely different areas where humanity also has no idea.
Lothar promotes effective transformations. His seminars, which he holds worldwide, are not only online but also offer personal, transformative experiences for people from all over the world. His special outdoor seminars, in particular, provide an impactful opportunity for personal development.
But for me, this has been lived normality, lived reality for decades. Always, of course, starting with myself and applying it further with people who then seek help. Yes, and that's just how it is now. Then in my life, after the first serious accident I talked about, I also had a second very serious accident. And that was also very interesting, and I would say the accident almost had to happen because I was able to discover and learn so many new things that were somehow still missing from my portfolio. To be more concrete, I was in the car, it must have been a microsleep, and then at approximately 120 kilometers per hour, I flipped over and crashed into a rock wall. The interesting thing was that when I was still trying to countersteer, my inner voice told me, Lothar, you're about to have a serious accident. Prepare yourself for it. And through my abilities, I suddenly was no longer perceiving just this reality, but rather the expanded realities, where this expanded world, where ancestors are, entities are. There are laws that people do not recognize like this, but I recognize something very fundamental, namely parallelities. That means we have infinitely many parallel lives, and they are all happening at the same time. This means our life is happening simultaneously, and parallel to this life, we have infinitely many other lives that are also occurring at the same time. And I experienced all of this while awake. So, not in a coma, but while conscious, it was all one world for me. And thus,
I had this extremely severe car accident where everyone thought, because the car was torn to pieces, where everyone thought I was dead. The paramedics didn't even approach the car. They waited until the emergency doctor arrived. The police and others just cordoned off the car, but no one went near it. Only when the emergency doctor was there did they get me out, because everyone thought I was dead. But to my great surprise, I didn't have any really serious injuries except for a head injury, and so I discharged myself from the hospital the next day in the morning against the doctor's wishes. They even wrote it down on the discharge papers. The patient disregards medical advice and leaves the clinic completely at their own responsibility, because I treated myself with my devices. And to my great surprise, or not just surprise, but as an impossibility, if one has such a severe head injury, I was fit again after 10 days. The EEG was normal again. Everything was fine. And this is inexplicable for today's sciences. But for me, it is true life. For me now, it's normal, nothing new. News. But what you see is that such a life, your friends, they said, yes, we envied you for your skills, but now that we know you better, and see how difficult that is for you. Because when I see people, I also see what is going on inside them, and that is stressful. That means when I am somewhere in a restaurant, I see this person has this problem or distortion, that one has that, and this one will get or already has this illness, and so on. And it's not really relaxing. And that's why I prefer to be alone, or to go up into the mountains alone, where I then see the different power spots, find energy places, energy lines and so on, which people are not really aware of. And then I go there with groups of people and put everyone in their right place. And suddenly they have the energy to work all day and not be tired after just an hour of work. And these are applications I conduct that have great success. So all in all, you can see that such a life is very, very difficult, and that such a life really challenges one. And yes, but you can also derive from this that you don't have to be destroyed by it, but you can also make a lot of good things out of it. And I have been intensely involved in research for over 30 years, developing devices, technologies, applications, and so on, and use them then accordingly. And that's just my life. It is an unconventional life, but my life.
Lothar survived death multiple times. Through his accumulated and experienced knowledge, he recognized the principles and successfully applies these principles with his participants and clients. He trains and educates therapists and doctors worldwide. Due to his unique and secret technologies, the Morphorminergonik was observed and pursued by selected elite circles. The reason for this is the revolutionary technology. People from all over the world seek out Lothar to address their health and life issues and then live fulfilled lives. Lothar has succeeded in understanding and consciously surviving death, the matrix. Entrepreneurs, athletes, people with any kind of blockage. Lothar helps achieve a better life. He is a well-regarded scientist in various professional circles around the world. Lothar's story is considered medically inexplicable. He is one of the few people who has experienced the inexplicable and makes this knowledge accessible to a small group of people.